All right. So we're online there. Okay, so excellent. Good having you guys. And let's see. So yeah, we got a new start time around 6 o'clock as opposed to 7. And just because of the technical difficulties, we're a little bit delayed. But we have Vaughn is with us in Milan, Italy. And so, Vaughn, I appreciate you staying up late because I'm sure it's
that's right.
Wherever you are, it's Milan is what is it like
6
8?
hours ahead.
Yeah, so it's late. So he has a friend named Mac who is watching with him, and he wanted a question answered. So Malcolm Hill, this is your question, and the question was, let me see if I can find it. And here it is. It says, question, since God knows everything that will happen over time, and God created everything, why did he create Satan, knowing that he would do what he would do to God's children over time? So you guys got the question? So Malcolm is asking from Milan, Italy, why did God create Satan? If he's God, he should know the future and should know that he's going to do bad stuff to the children of God. So why did he do it anyway? And so, Phil?
Well, I believe it's for the free will.
Explain. Develop that.
Because I think the human being needs to understand that something becomes valuable for himself when the opposite exists. The day is only good because you have the night.
Mm-hmm.
It's appreciable when people are sick.
Yeah.
So if only the good was existing without the bad, people will not understand that how precious is the good.
Okay.
So the good need the bad to survive. God is good.
That's like duality. Uh-oh.
Yeah,
It's
no,
starting to
no,
segue into
I got a problem
duality.
with duality. Because
See?
God created us to understand good. We only got a knowledge of evil from the serpent coming in the garden and tempting Eve. That was
Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
that our knowledge of evil wasn't from God. Our knowledge of evil came from the serpent, came from Satan himself.
So what's the answer to Mac's question?
So,
why did God create Satan?
Well,
I'm sorry. Ben, did you?
No, I think another way to think of it is God wants our love and devotion. And he doesn't want slave-like, robots, right, who have no choice. So it's free will, but then what he gave us free will in order for us to choose him and have real love and devotion to him. So only by having that free will can we have that kind of divine relationship. And that's another way to say what Phil was saying, that that free will was essential. Otherwise, we would just be robots.
Yeah, I think that that's correct. I agree with all three of you for different reasons. Steve is correct about the whole duality thing. I wouldn't take it so far as to say that, you need evil for there to be good. God created evil and good so that God created evil so you could like good better. That is kind of like New Age duality, so I don't agree with that, but I do agree with what Phil said earlier about the fact that, in essence, you need free will. If God creates a robot that can only say, I love you, God, I love you, God, I love you, God, then that's not real love. So when God's looking down, let's take a look at our timeline. This is our chart of history of time, and we see that we've got the creation right here in eternity past. God creates Lucifer, the anointed cherub that covers. When God created Lucifer, he was a good guy. But again, like we've already discussed, free will has come into the equation. And since God created Satan as Lucifer, not as the devil, the good guy, he also had the ability to make a decision to follow God and to love God or not. And he exercised his decision to rebel against God. Why is that? As I finish the floor. Because he became envious. He saw that he was beautiful, the Bible says, and his awesome beauty and intelligence, in essence, drove him mad. He decided, I want to be like God. And see, hit that light if you could. And he decided he wanted to become like God. But since God is outside of the space-time continuum, when Satan falls, and here it is, he's no longer the anointed cherub that covers, he's thrown out of the third heaven, and we're going to discuss that a little bit tonight. Then he goes into the Garden of Eden, and he corrupts Eve and causes man to fall, and all the bad stuff starts to happen. But since God is outside of space-time, he's looking at the whole of human history, the whole of the history of the universe, the same way I'm looking at this poster that shows eternity past, eternity future, the fall in the garden, the crucifixion on the cross, the rise of the church, the rise of the Antichrist, the rapture, second coming, all of that. But he did it anyway. And I think, in addition to the fine points you guys have made, I think the reason for it was because he knew that man would fall, right? It was a decision, according to Scripture, between the Father and the Son, that Jesus would come to earth as the atoning sacrifice before the universe was created. So before the universe was even created, they had already decided, after we create the universe, the anointed cherub is going to fall and become Satan, and then man will be lost. Let's have you go down, and I'll have you be the atoning sacrifice. And that way, not only will man be redeemed from the fall, but he will be elevated to a new level of awesomeness and a new level of being that he didn't have before. Adam was awesome in the garden, but he had the ability to fall, and he exercised it by following after his wife and rebelling against God. But when we get to the end of the timeline, after the rapture occurs, we will be given new resurrection bodies, but we'll also be given new perfected spirits that can't fall anymore. So we won't be like Lucifer. We won't be like Adam in the garden. We'll have perfect understanding of God. And because God is awesome, he deserves to be worshipped, there'll never be a mistake made that, hey, there's a better way than God's way. We'll understand that God's way is the absolute, and we'll never have a desire to rebel against him and choose something else. Ingrid.
I like to think of it as this is all just part of his plan, and it is his will, and we are in existence here for his pleasure. And perhaps he wanted to create a scenario that has people who have made the choice to be with him to ultimately reign forever.
I think another way to look at it is kind of like boot camp. If you were going off to the military, before you can become a general or become a corporal or a leader or a commander in the army, you go off to boot camp, you do basic training, and you're trained up. And I think what God is doing with this special creation called man, which even the angels looked down from heaven and saw, like, what is this? This man that's been created. The angels were astounded when God created another living being in his own image and put the breath of life inside of him. We are a different type of creature or creation than the angels are. They don't have the ability to reign and rule alongside God as we do. And that's the ultimate destiny of the human race, is to reign and rule with Christ in the millennial reign during the 1,000-year period of time on earth and throughout eternity. That's not the destiny of the angels. They're going to be our servants. They are, faithful messengers of God and the servants of God. And to the extent that we'll be reigning and ruling with him, they'll be servants to us as well. So I think, and Ben, I'm going to get right to you. I think what God is doing is allowing Satan and the fallen angels and the demons that afflict us to do what? Train us up. It's like our personal trainer going to the gym, no pain, no gain. We are put through a workout. And God gives each man only a set, limited period of days on the earth in comparison to eternity, in comparison to the human history of 6,000 years plus a 1,000-year millennium. A lifespan of 60 or 70 years is nothing. And so God gives us a very limited period of time. It says it's in Ecclesiastes, I think it says something along the lines of the days of man are short and full of trouble, and it might have been Solomon writing that in Ecclesiastes, but that's true. When you're young, things are going well, and you're sitting at home on Saturday morning watching your cartoons, eating Captain Crunch. Life seems good, but then you grow up, and life becomes so much more complicated. But God only gives us a set period of time, and the set period of time is not to enjoy your best life now or to accomplish all these things and have riches and all. The purpose of our physical life on earth is to train us spiritually for our leadership positions in eternity. And so I think he allows us to go through buffeting and struggles and things. And that's where Phil's point comes in, where you can't really experience the greater good unless you understand all these things. Jesus became a man so he can relate to the struggles of the human race. And so we will be able to relate better in eternity when we see what we came from and all that. And Ben, you were going to add to that.
I really like how you pointed out that the church after the rapture is not returning, as some people like to think, we're returning to how good things were in the Garden of Eden. No, it's going to be much better. And the way to think of it then is that God is taking us through a process for a more perfect union.
Yeah.
So if you think of that, then Adam and Eve, that was not God's best for us. They had to fall, and Jesus had to come back in order for us to attain an even higher perfect union that was known from the beginning would occur, but he wasn't going to create us in that perfect union from the start as robots.
Right.
We had to go through trials and tribulations in order to appreciate that more perfect union that we get at the end.
We call it a conditioned precedent. You have to do something first to get to this contractual end. There must be a conditioned precedent first that must occur before this ultimate goal. And that's absolutely correct. I think the way to look at Adam and Eve in the garden, you could look at them as children, innocent and naive in the garden. And that's why, Eve was so easily deceived by Satan. And the husband, listening to the voice of his wife, I'm sure he wasn't doing it for evil purposes. He's like, well, she's a wonderful person, and God gave her to me, and I love her. And so, even though God should be first, I'm doing it for a good reason. And so, in a sense, he was a very childlike naivete, thinking that he could do that, please his wife, and also please God by rebelling against God, so on and so forth. Very childlike. If you're raising children or something, or if you've been around children, you see that children aren't necessarily wicked and evil, but they do stupid things or they do rebellious things, even though they're not necessarily evil when they're doing it, and they run out in the street to play. It's because they want to, but not because they're trying to, refute your authority in their life, but they get hit by a car and die unless we look out for them. And so falling in the garden was kind of sort of like children rebelling against the parents who didn't appreciate the consequences that they'd been warned of. And as my mom used to say when I was a kid, you got to learn things the hard way.
Yeah.
And so Adam and Eve had to learn things the hard way. But God, as Ben sort of alluded to, already knew that. And that's where you sort of get into this preordination thing that the Calvinists have twisted and turned and perverted into something that it absolutely never was and was never meant to be. And so God predestined us to reign and rule with Christ throughout all of eternity. And he predestined us to be able to come to know him through his son, Jesus, so that our relationship could be even more intimate and special and wonderful. The angels don't have a Messiah that will come and die on their behalf so that they can be redeemed and they can reign and rule with Christ. The angels aren't going to reign and rule with Christ in eternity.
When you say predestined, us as a people, but not on an individual level.
Well, no, I would say both. It says, those whom he knew, he predestined. And the Calvinists say that means that only, two people in this room were predestined for heaven and everybody else was predestined for hell. No, what that means is everybody that's a son of Adam is predestined to spend eternity in heaven, reigning and ruling with Christ throughout that. That's our destiny. But because you have free will, you can choose to opt out of that destiny and pick a different destiny for you that will eventually wind you up in the lake of fire. Now, does God want that for you? No. Because he didn't create the lake of fire for the sons of Adam. He did it for the fallen angels. But to be consistent, he has to give you the same freedom of choice that, Lucifer was allowed when he rebelled. And so if he forced you by putting some kind of mind freak in your brain so that you couldn't do anything, then you wouldn't really love him, right? If you mind controlled some girl by putting a chip in her brain so that she would have to love you and say yes when you offer to marry her, you would know that, and you would know the only reason she's saying yes and that she really loves me is because she has this chip in her brain that makes her say yes to whatever. You'll get no satisfaction out of that because it's not real love, unless you have a right to say no and the ability to not love. Then choosing to love is kind of a meaningless paradigm. So that, long and short of it, is God knew everything that was going to happen in advance because he stands outside of space-time, to answer Mac's question. But he did it anyway because he loved the sons of Adam so much that even though it was going to cost Jesus his life, he decided beforehand, before Adam was even created, that was going to be the plan. So that just kind of underscores the love that Jesus has for us, that before he created us, he already knew he was going to, if I create him, I'm going to have to go to earth and die for him. But I'll do it anyway because I want to have this special relationship at the end of time that, as Ben was pointing out, kind of requires all of these intermediary steps. But when we get there to the finish line, it's going to be well worth it. It's going to be awesome. So that's
Good question.
it's a good question by Mac from Milan, Italy. Good question, and there you have it. Now, before we go into tonight's teaching of Revelation chapter 11 and 12, I just want to jump back from a couple weeks ago. I think Ingrid had kind of laid out a question about the trumpets and seals and bowl judgments that we've been talking about, and she was asking about when will the plagues of Revelation chapter 9 we talked about last time we were here 2 weeks ago, and when we did Revelation 9 and 10, and we saw that there's this 200 million man demonic army that are transgenic Nephilim monsters that are killing up 70% of the population of the earth eventually gets killed. And so Ingrid was asking about the timing, and the chart we have here kind of places it during the first half of the tribulation period. And it's an area that's been debated by different scholars, but I think that the better way to look at it is that the judgments in heaven and the sounding of the trumpet in heaven, because heaven is outside of space-time, doesn't necessarily require it to have occurred during the first or second half of the tribulation period, but that is actual playing out. The silencing, the first of the 7 trumpets, hail, fire, and blood. The second was the burning mountain that fell down to earth. 3 was the star wormwood that hit the earth, poisoned the seas, killed all the fish. The sun was diminished on the 4th trumpet. The 5th trumpet was a plague of locusts, and the plague of locusts were really these demonic entities that came from out of the abuso, from out of the bottomless pit. They were these transgenic demonic monsters. And then you had the 6th trumpet, which was a plague of these demonic horsemen, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This occurrence, I think, best can be understood as occurring during the second half of the tribulation period. And I was reading a book, Mark Hitchcock, who's a pretty impressive Bible scholar. He kind of addresses it, and admittedly, when you read Revelation, if you try to read it chronologically, then it kind of places things occurring that isn't necessarily the way that actually will occur when we go through the 7-year timeline. So I agree with him that it should be placed during the second half of the tribulation period. He makes a pretty good point, because he says, Jesus said that the second half of the tribulation period will be called the Great Tribulation period because it will be worse than any time ever. If all of these deaths that are going to occur within a few months of one another, and we're talking about 3 or 4 billion people out of 7 billion people, or 5 out of 8 billion people, it couldn't be worse in the second half because there aren't that many people left to kill. So it has to occur during the second half for Jesus, Matthew 24 Olivet Discourse, the second half of the tribulation is the worst time of all. To be true, it would have to have occurred. So we can see, trumpets being blown in heaven, meaning God's given authority for these things to happen. But I think the best understanding is that it will be after the midway point when the Antichrist goes in the temple and desecrates it. Satan is now cast down from out of heaven. He's already been cast down after the fall, but now he's been cut off from access, where he's going in as the prosecuting attorney and slandering us, which is where we get the word devil from, which means slanderer, accuser. So I think it's best understood, this grouping of trumpet judgments probably best would fit in just before the bowls, but on the right-hand side of our sort of line of demarcation. I'll just read from Mark Hitchcock's book, interesting book called, appropriately enough, The End, by Mark Hitchcock. And from page 357, I'll just read, he has a sub-chapter called The Timing of the Trumpets. And he says, most prophecy teachers agree that the 7 seals, which we were just discussing, are opened during the first half of the tribulation, and the 7 bowls are poured out near the very end of the tribulation, which is the way our chart has it laid out, because that's the way most Bible prophecy teachers teach it. But he makes a good point that really wasn't raised, in my mind, for the first time. I thought about sort of peripherally, but it wasn't really brought out until Ingrid asked a question about it a few weeks back. And I think he addresses it, the concern she raised. And so he says, the central chronological question revolves around the timing of the trumpets. Are they blown in the first or second half of the tribulation? And he says, while good arguments can be made for either view, the issue to me centers on the severity of the trumpet judgments. 1/3 of the earth's population perishes in the 6th trumpet judgment alone. That's just one trumpet judgment. 1/3 of Earth's population is gone after one of the 6 of the total 7 trumpets. And he says, adding in the 1/4 of the population that dies earlier in the 4th seal judgment, which is from Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 and 8 that we talked about, that's 1/2 of the world's population dying during the first half of the tribulation, if the trumpets are located there. Putting the trumpets in the first half of the tribulation, he goes on to say, makes the first half of the tribulation worse than the second half, which contradicts the statement of Jesus that the great tribulation, the final 3.5 years of the 70th week of Daniel, will be the worst period of time in human history, which we find at Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. If the devastation of the trumpets in the first half of the tribulation is in the first half of the tribulation, then the final half would not fulfill Christ's prophecy. Thus, it makes better sense to place the trumpets in the second half of the tribulation. And I think that, even though the vast majority of Bible scholars do place the trumpet judgments during the first half, I think it makes more sense to put it during the second half, and that explains why, during the first half, people are thinking, hey, this is good, we got this peace treaty going, and everything's happening, and then you got the midway point, Antichrist is assassinated, Satan's kicked out of heaven, knowing he only has 1,260 days left to do his thing, and things are getting worse and worse on the earth. And shortly after that, the church, the one world church, which I think is the Catholic Church, and that gives me a perfect segue, starts to fall apart during the second half of the tribulation period, which brings me to the point of the Catholic Church and the Pope visiting yesterday, and having lived in D.C. for many years, and having gone to Jesuit school in Georgetown for law school, and seeing, having been, Catholic University of America, which is further up New Hampshire Avenue from Georgetown and Capitol Hill, having been there and seen the opulence of that basilica, it's the largest Catholic basilica in the United States of America. And it's filled, literally filled with silver, gold, and velvet. I mean, I walked in there, it's like I was at Disney World or something. And we saw, as the Pope left the White House, how the people in the streets, I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch it because it happened during the day, so I recorded it, and, it was astounding. As he's going through the streets of D.C. in his little Pope mobile, it had like an open thing with a bulletproof, thing, and the people lined up alongside the streets in the nation's capital. It was like they were worshiping or welcoming a conquering Caesar coming back from overthrowing, whoever, during the Battle of Carthage or something like that. And they're coming home victorious. They were cheering for him. And when he finally got to the Catholic University of America, they had set up, I guess you would call it an altar and a stage, and on the altar was, the only way you can describe it is a throne. And he had his sycophants dressed in their purple and red, and the bishops and the cardinals helped him to the throne. And after he got the seat, these cardinals and bishops came to him and bowed down before him. And as he went through the streets of D.C., they stopped the Pope Mobile, and you could see the Secret Service agents from the Vatican running out and grabbing kids, like little girls, whatever. And it was so contrived. It was so obviously contrived, like a photo op. They were clearly, in my mind, trying to. The only thing I could think of is they were trying to recreate the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Substitute for Christ.
And that's what we know the title of the Pope. Pontifex Maximus means the great bridge builder, but the other term that he's more hesitant and shy about using, Vicarius Christi, he knows, means replacement Christ or Antichrist. The vicar of Christ, that literally means the Antichrist, the one who comes in the place of Christ. And that's exactly what he was doing. As he was passing through the streets, he would have his his security people grab a kid from out of the audience, and he'd lay his hands on their head and touch them, as if like if he were Jesus himself. It was the most shocking and stunning exercise or visual evidence that we are in the last of the last days, and that the Pope could be, and I think the Pope is, the person referred to in the book of Revelation as the other beast. There's one from the land and one from the sea, and one will be the religious propaganda artist who will get the whole world to wander after the beast. And so when I watched him sitting on a throne, I thought it was quite poignant and appropriate when later in this they were doing, for the very first time in the history of the United States of America, in the history of the Catholic Church, they I guess canonized a saint on American soil. It's never happened before. Keep in mind, as a student of history and political science, honors graduate here, I studied a lot of this stuff up. The founding fathers outlawed Catholicism. They weren't even allowed to come over in the Mayflower. And they couldn't be part of the Constitutional College. They couldn't be part of the signers on the Constitution. And Jesuit schools were not allowed to be set up here until Georgetown found, squeezed in 1789 and stole out, a plot of land on the Potomac River before it became Washington, D.C. And that was the first, Jesuit or Catholic outpost in the United States of America. And then, some 100 years later, Catholic University of America was established and became the biggest basilica. But at the time of our founding fathers, Catholicism was considered an enemy of the state, a danger to democracy and to the American way of life. And so those guys weren't even allowed to come over, which is why Halloween, when we talked about Halloween and how that was kind of brought over by the sort of Scotch Gaelic people, it was sort of a more of a ethnic, syncretized, celebration that, that the Irish Catholics in Ireland, practiced. That wasn't allowed. Halloween couldn't be celebrated in America until like the 1850s because it was considered a Catholic, occultic rite. And so if it wasn't until the mid-1800s that started to change, when I see the overwhelming acceptance of Roman Catholicism, and particularly the Jesuit branch of Roman Catholicism, which is the most dangerous, the most ruthless, the most...
Isn't Francis the first Jesuit pope?
Absolutely. The first Jesuit pope ever. Absolutely. And to see him accepted, not just accepted, and but to be venerated and worshipped. The people in the street, I said to myself, now I can see how easy it's going to be for Antichrist to do his thing. The people are just like blindly, and the vast majority of people in our country are not Catholics. I forgot what the numbers are. I think it's something like 70 million in the United States. And he said, oh, those are good numbers, but you could be doing better. And, 70 million out of 300 million people, that's less than a third. So you maybe a quarter of the population, 1 out of every 4. But I saw almost just the blind reverence, like save us, like the people here in this country, they're looking for a savior to come and save us and give us hope. And this man is exalted on the throne. And I just can't believe how people who aren't even Catholic are flocking to this man. And I see, we're in the final stages. He's going to bring in the whole group. Everybody that claims to be anything other than an atheist will flock to his control as he brings, all people together. And I heard the CNN commentators talking about, Pope Francis preaching, the gospel of bringing his gospel to the people of the United States, and that's exactly what it was. He said nothing about Jesus. He went to the White House and he talked about global warming, and he talked about immigration and how the United States should stop trying to prevent immigrants from coming into the country. Said nothing about the gospel of Jesus Christ. He was talking about the gospel of, Pope Francis. The social justice gospel. That's exactly right. The social justice gospel, which is his gospel. And that's what CNN called it. They didn't call it the Catholic gospel. They called it Pope Francis's gospel, in which he's been promoting and preaching throughout the day. And then, we will get to 11 and 12. But I noticed that today, I thought it was appropriate that later when the camera was panning, they were like fawning over him. Oh, he's the most energetic, and people half his age have trouble keeping up with him. As he sat on his throne, and they began singing these religious songs to begin the canonization process of this really controversial priest who was known to have converted Indians to Catholicism by force. And, a number of Native American groups were like protesting, like, this is an outrage. This man was a tyrant, if not, some kind of a pathological possible killer of Indian people that were forced to convert in California and out west. And so why that person was selected to be the person canonized in America, so I don't know. But during the canonization service, after the first few minutes, I noticed that this guy who was being extolled as God in human flesh fell asleep during the canonization process, so that he was, after a few minutes, he was completely out. And no one, not one of the commentators, and they're like, oh, he's done this, and look, he waved to the child. Look, he's giving eye contact. He makes you feel like you're the only person. Not one of them commented on, he's sitting there, and he's looking kind of surly, and next thing you know, his head is down. The 2 bishops sitting on the side of him, you can tell they're squirming in their chair, so like, oh my God, this is humiliating. We're on international television. I can't reach over and nudge him because we're on national TV and it's being broadcast around the world. And I sat there thinking, like, this chubby little old man from Argentina is being worshipped as God. This is our God who's falling asleep during his canonization. He is no God, I said to myself. He's a man. He's no God. He's a man just like me. And he can't even stay awake, So I thought that was ironic, and I noticed that one tweet came in on CNN that said, hey, what's wrong with the Pope? He looks really uncomfortable, because he looked like he was in great deal of pain. He has apparently sciatica, and he can barely walk, so he can barely get up the steps, and he was hobbling around. And they kind of like, after that, they were like, well, so this viewer writes in, what's wrong with the Pope? What's his deal? And they kind of blew it off, like, he's got sciatica, okay, so whatever. And I noticed that all the CNN broadcasters, Roman Catholics, they were like devoutly, what's the guy's name whose father was the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, his son Chris is one of the...
Is that right?
He was like, he tried to call him, I guess, in Italian, and Papa Francisco, like he's doing the show, and he's like, he's coming by, and he just like drops the mic and starts screaming like a child. He was like a teenage girl at a rock concert, like at a Beatles concert. Papa Francisco, and the guy didn't look at him. He was like, oh, okay. But the disturbingly unsettling thing is that virtually everybody on the CNN, broadcast are Catholics, and the same is true for Fox News, which is supposedly the exact opposite of CNN. One's conservative, one's liberal, they're arch enemies of one. They're all Jesuits over at Fox, and they're all Catholics over at CNN. And they pointed out, they said, well, we're very proud to report, yes, as a proud Catholic, which I am. And so he's pronouncing that he's a proud Catholic, right? And I was asking myself, how can people in America be deceived into thinking this has anything to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ? Jesus was hated by the people. When did Jesus ride into Rome for an audience with Caesar and was hailed by crowds on the, Appian Way as he rode into town to meet with Caesar for, lunch at, the palace? That never happened. Jesus said, the servants aren't greater than the master. If they've hated me, they're going to hate you too. But they were loving the Pope because he wasn't mentioning Jesus. And so the president extolled him at the White House, and then, later at Catholic University, and then today when they gave that joint address to the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. It was interesting because I've been, I interned in Capitol Hill, and I lived not far from there. And, I noticed things I'd never noticed before. Because when I first went there as an intern, I'm kind of like wide-eyed, starry-eyed, like, oh man, the seat of democracy in this wonderful, God-fearing country. And I realized this isn't a God-fearing country. I saw nothing but the belly of Semiramis in the Capitol, and then all the phallic symbols representing the phallus of Nimrod/Osiris. And then I noticed that in the chambers, under the Capitol rotunda, where the Senate and the House come together to sit, there's seats, so that if you get all 200 senators and all the 435 representatives all together at once, you got 635 people sitting in one room together, that the chairs are separated, these cherry wood or oak or whatever, very, very well done, handcrafted wooden benches, but between each seat, I've never noticed it before, even though I've been in the chambers, a star. But not the star like on the American flag, but a hexagram, which is the most wicked symbol in all of occultism. There's one hexagram for each seat in our House of Representatives and Senate. And I just thought, holy crap, man, there's paganism everywhere I look. And then there was a statue of one of the popes in the Capitol building. I didn't know that. Like, when did that happen? And the CNN announcer pointed out, he said, well, 6 of the 9 justices, 70% of the, United States Supreme Court is Catholic. Not Christian, but Catholic.
Yeah, there's like no Protestants.
Unbelievable. 70% is one denomination? Like, if you imagine there were like 70% were Mormons, like, people lose their minds. And they pointed out that in the House and in the Senate, in U.S. Congress, is dramatically higher percentage-wise Roman Catholic than the population as a whole. And what does that tell us?
Wow.
That tells us, boys and girls, that a long time ago, they crept in unawares and they grabbed the machinery of government. They have our Supreme Court, they have our House and Senate, the legislative branch, and the executive kowtows to this man as if he were a god. And so the message is that biblical Christianity is not been extolled, and that Roman Catholicism is exactly what everyone who's a biblical Christian has suspected from the very beginning, that Rome, the Roman Church, is the whore of Babylon, which we'll be studying in Revelation 17 and 18. But for me to see that with my own eyes, it's one thing for, a senator to go to the Vatican and get invited in and have a nice time, but it's another thing for me to see tears in the eyes of, the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem, who's the Vice President of the United States of America, both with tears in their eyes, because they're both devout Catholics. Not just Catholic, but devout Catholics. And to see this man with this little funny cap and his pagan, ritualized Babylonian paganism outfit being worshipped in our House of Representatives. It's supposed to represent the people. It was shocking, sad, and it was a wake-up. It was like, are we that late into the Bible prophecy being fulfilled that at any moment, this man, and they said, the commentators were saying, well, his gospel is a gospel of unity. He said, I am a child of the Americas, because he was born in South America. And he says, I look forward to the day when we're all united here in the Americas. And so then the commentators start talking about, well, he's all in favor of uniting all of the Americas together as one unit. And so I was like, oh, here we are. And finally we get to what all this nonsense was about, was to bring in the New World Order and the giving away sovereignty. The Constitution, which, Ben, you have a copy of and you extol so much, it's going to have to be done away with eventually. When we unite with South America and North America and Canada under the rubric of the European Union and all, our Constitution will become superfluous, and there'll have to be a new Constitution that meets the needs of everyone. And so, I was shocked and amazed, but we are much, I think, later in the proceedings than I ever thought we were. And I shudder to think I'll be watching with bated breath tomorrow for his address to the United Nations, which is right, the one world government, organization on the banks of the East River in New York City. He'll be addressing them there tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see what he says. But we certainly have taken a dramatic step towards fulfillment of Bible prophecy. I think specifically Revelation chapter 17 and 18 that talks about this mystery Babylon system, this harlot, this woman dressed in scarlet and red, which is what the Pope and his bishops were dressed in today, uniting all the world together under apostate form of Christianity, not under Buddhism or Zoroastrianism, but under an apostate form of Christianity that leads the whole world to worship the Antichrist. And so I think we're right at that moment. And so with that, I'll get off my my little soapbox there, and Ingrid, you can go ahead and start us up with Revelation chapter 11. But I just tell you, man, if we pay attention to the news, we are living in the most exciting period of time in the history of the planet Earth, because we, I believe, are the terminal generation that will witness the second coming of Jesus Christ, preceded by the rapture, which would mean we could be out of here at any moment. Wouldn't that be awesome? So, anyway, I'm a little frustrated by that, but I'm also encouraged too, because I know that, man, if we're that far down the road and I'm seeing all this occultic symbolism and supposedly the legislative house of the world's only Christian nation, I'm seeing Satan's been playing ball here in the United States, in D.C., while in the heartland of America, like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Indiana, God-fearing, Puritan-type people reading their Bibles, had no idea what was really going on in the nation's capital. And that's why all the Babylonian paganism is accumulated there in that city, which is sort of a ritual room for Babylonian paganism right here in our nation's capital. So we're much later than when we first believed. Yogi Berra, he died the other day. I love some of his sayings where that guy dropped out of school in the 8th grade. He said some stuff that just profound. I mean, right? He said, in life there's some difficulties, but when you come to a fork in the road, take it. How about that? That's one of my favorite ones. Well, there's a couple of the others.
It ain't over till it's over.
It ain't over till it's over. You come to a fork in the road in life, take it. And there was another one. You know what he said? That I thought was kind of from a biblical prophecy standpoint. He says, future ain't what it used to be. And that to me was like the all-time best. The future ain't what it used to be, man. Times have changed, man. Which I guess means when our grandparents were kids, they could look to the future with hope.
Yeah.
They're going to be creating washing machines next year. Wow, we won't have to use washer boards anymore. So they can look forward to the future with hope. Whereas we, this modernized generation with all our high-tech toys and gadgets, what do we have to look forward to? One world government, one world religion, and J. Vernon McGee was pointing out, I thought he made a really good point. I was listening to one of his old tapes on Revelation chapter 11, and he said, this is America's supposedly the home of the free. And he's saying this stuff in the 70s.
Yeah.
He says, I just don't know how free we actually are. He said, I can't imagine back in biblical days or back in, ancient days, before the founding of our country, where people had to stand in line to do much of anything. He said, it seems like I spend most of my time standing in line waiting to do this, waiting to buy my groceries, waiting to go to the laundromat, waiting for the light to turn. He said, back in in the older days, nobody stood around waiting in line. There were no lines that you had to. You just did whatever you had to do. You needed to go get food, you go get food. If you need to eat, he said, we've been sort of seduced into thinking because we have new gadgets and toys that we have it so much better. But are we more free than our forebears were? Maybe we're not. You know, it's just a different type of slavery. We've been taught to love our servitude, and so, you know, when you think about your iPhone has a chip in it and you can't go anywhere, and you know, I've got a case that I'm going to be trying next week that has to do with a DNA swab that was voluntarily given for a benign purpose that got put into an international database that will in perpetuity be checked by any country in the world forever. And you're never told that when you donate DNA and it gets put into the CODIS system, as they call it. You're not told that. Now all the nations of the world can access the most intimate part of who you are is your DNA fingerprint. And they can embed, it's like nobody, they couldn't come to your house and check your apartment whenever they wanted to, but they can go inside your cell and check to see what you're doing. And now you know they've got the eyeball identification thing. You know, we've got, my phone already has a thumbprint identification, but now they've got the eye scan thing where you look at things and they'll be able to open the door. Oh, okay, we recognize the retinal scan. But what about when the retinal scan will be used for other things in addition to allowing you to get on your airplane, in addition to allowing you to get money out of the bank? And that's where we're going, and that's where we're at. And so, are we more free than we've ever been before? I would suggest not, boys and girls. I would say those of you that are here in this room with us, you guys are in the know. You guys already understand these things. But for people out there listening that haven't been born again yet, you better get on the Jesus train, because when that train pulls out of the station from Father's house, you are not going to want to be left behind. It's going to be a nasty, horrible place to be. All of your liberties are going to be gone. And we already see them being whittled away by the powers that be, that are in bed with the whore of Babylon. Shocking, disappointing, embarrassing, shameful, shameful, shameful. But I'm done. I promise. I'm done. Ingrid, Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Give that to us.
And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months.
Tread underfoot for how long?
42 months,
42 months.
1,260 days.
Exactly. So that should, like, ding, 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 that should set off a bell. Like, wait a minute, what are they talking about?
Great tribulation.
Right, because we're looking at our big chart here. The 70th week of Daniel is this period of time here. The first 69 weeks of the year led us up to the crucifixion of the Messiah. Then you had the parenthetical period where the 69th week was interrupted by the church age, 2,000 years of the church age, and then after the rapture of the church, kaboom, up into heaven, you have the 70th week, which is divided out into two periods of 1,260 days, which is how many months?
3.5.
How many months?
So 42 months, sorry.
How many years?
3.5 years.
Okay, so that's what Ingrid was just reading. And so we find the same phraseology being used 600 years earlier in another prophetic book. Which book would that be?
Daniel.
Well, Steve, since you mentioned Daniel,
Right?
read Daniel 7, verses 20 to 25 for me. It's amazing how God has used the most important Old Testament book of Daniel when Israel was in captivity in Babylon and made it almost like a photo image of the last book in the Bible, the book of Revelation, where John is writing almost exactly the same stuff that Daniel is writing, except they're doing it 600 years apart. Steve, read for us Daniel 7, verses 20 through 25.
And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the others which came up, before whom 3 fell, even of that horn had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. I beheld And the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of his kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into the hand until a time and times and a dividing of time.
That's sort of the sort of Old Testament way of saying 3.5 time, times, and the dividing of time. So time is 1, times plural is 2, and a divided time is what? Half time. So if you take 1 plus 2 plus a half, what does that give you?
3.5.
3.5. And so he's talking about in terms of years now. So Daniel is using the language of this 3.5 year period. What is he talking about? The Antichrist is going to prevail against the saints of the Lord for this 3.5 year period of time, which must be none other than what Jesus had referred to as the Great Tribulation period. So, okay, Phil, if you would. Revelation chapter 3, verses, chapter 11, verses 3 through 6.
And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceeded out of the mouth and devoured their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of the prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will.
So here we have the introduction of 2 witnesses. And it says, Ingrid, pointed out that there was going to be a period of time where the temple is measured, and a certain part was not measured because it was given to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles would tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months, which we now know is 3.5 years, and what Daniel referred to as 3.5 years. But then we find out in verses 3 through 6 that it says, I'll give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy. For how long?
1,260 days.
1,260 days, which is exactly the same thing as saying 42 months or 3.5 years. So God is trying to give us in the same sentence 42 months and 1,260 days. So he's letting you know this is the same thing. This is the same thing as the times and dividing the time. So 3.5 years, 1,260 days, 42 months are all talking about the same thing, which is the Great Tribulation period. What were you going to say? Okay, and it says these 2 are the olive tree and the 2 lampstands, and if anybody wants to harm them, fire can come down, proceed out of their mouth and devour them. And if anyone wants to harm them, they must be killed in this manner. These have the power to shut up heaven so no rain falls on the earth in the days of their prophecy, which is a 1,260-day period. And they have the power over waters to turn them into blood and strike the earth with all the plagues as often as they desire. And, it's kind of reminds you, who does this kind of remind you of?
Elijah calling down fire from heaven.
Elijah called down fire. Who could turn water into blood?
Moses
did that during, the Egyptian captivity. God sent Moses, and he brought the plagues, let my people go, or I'm going to turn, the river Nile into blood and make frogs come up. So there's an incredible debate going on about who these 2 witnesses are. So let's see. I'll say it right up front. There's no way to know for certain, but who do we think they are? Who are these 2 witnesses? Who would you guys give a guess as?
I'll take that, Elijah and Moses.
That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good. That's and it's funny because Mark Hitchcock, whose book we featured here tonight, that's exactly what he says. Mark Hitchcock says that, and Chuck Missler gives us that as well. I've heard other people say that they thought it could be Elijah and Enoch,
Yeah.
and the reason why Elijah and Enoch get selected a lot is why, Steve.
Because they were taken up. They didn't actually die. They didn't suffer death as men.
Those are the only two guys in all Scripture who never died, and the Bible says it is appointed unto man once to die, and then judgment. So some people say, well, it has to be Elijah and Enoch for them to come back to die, so that they can fulfill. But Mark makes a good point in his book. Again, the Mark Hitchcock book, The End. He makes a good point. He says, nah, that was just a general statement that in general, it's appointed the man wants to die, and then after that judgment. Because he said, what about Lazarus?
Yeah, he would.
Lazarus
would have died twice.
didn't die once, he died twice.
Yeah.
And so did everybody else that Jesus raised from the dead. They all died more than once. So, that's not a hard and fast, but he says his best guess leads him to believe it's, as Ben said, Moses and Elijah, because Moses was the guy that could turn the sea to blood, and Elijah was calling fire down. So either way, the real important thing here is that their ministry is for a 1260-day period, so it would tend to lead me to believe that this is right about at the halfway point of the tribulation period, and it would run pretty much to the end, and they would get killed, or it was just before the halfway point. But either way, the point is that God is making clear that 1260 days, that's a real important time frame. And so, again, Steve pointed out for us in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, that are you there, Steve? Well, you can do it real quick. Don't worry about it. It's what Steve was going to read is that Daniel is saying that Antichrist will dominate the saints and punish them and persecute them for a time, and dividing of time for a 3.5-year period of time, which is a 1260-day period. Interesting thing about these prophets, though, is that during this 1260-day period, they are invincible. The two witnesses cannot be stopped. Antichrist, who Steve in Daniel, you're at Daniel 7:25. Read that real quick.
And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times in the dividing of time.
So everybody's going to be given into Antichrist's hands, the little horn. But these two prophets are going to be the exception to that rule. He's able to kill everybody except them, because their ministry has not been completed. And so I heard one person say that the same is true for us. As long as we are within the will of God and we are doing the will of God, while we are out doing our business, whether we are going and preaching to a bunch of Satanists or Klansmen or whatever, we can't be killed, right? Because Satan cannot kill us without permission from the Lord. He has authority and power, but he doesn't have authority and power over our lives. And so, as long as we are within the will of God, we're unstoppable. And when your ministry is done, like Steve and I, men, we go out on Saturdays, we preach the gospel on South Beach. Like when I'm done doing that, when I pass out the last track I got to get my full reward in heaven, get me the freak out of here, man. I'm out. I'm ready to roll. Right now, Phil, he probably like, I got Ingrid at home, so take her first. Get Herb and Steve first, and come get me third. When the Jesus train rolling, put me last on the stop. Just pick me up last. I'm ready to go, but just pick Ingrid and I up last. Get Ben, Steve, and Herb first. And Reno, they're single guys. So. But yeah, that's kind of the attitude. It's like when your ministry is over, there's no point in being here, which flies totally in the face of the whole prosperity gospel. Your best life now. Oh no, your goal was to get a mansion in a Learjet. Now once you got the mansion in a Learjet, you want to stay here as long as possible to enjoy those things. You can't enjoy your Learjet mansion in heaven. Right. You want to be here. And so it's clear. It's becoming clearer and clearer to me. The Holy Spirit reveals. I don't speak in tongues. I don't see visions. But it becomes more and more clear to me in the Spirit that what I'm seeing on Christian television that drives me bananas and makes me want to scratch my eyes out is the last days apostasy of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I saw on our Calvary website that they're posting now the police be on the lookouts for. It used to be like, I know they probably still do inspirational messages and like, Ephesians 2 verses 3 and 4. Trust in the Lord with all our heart, lean not to your own. The other day they Miami Beach police are searching for this guy. We need to all partner together. When we get to the point where the churches are now shilling for the government and their centurions, like when did the churches that Paul and Timothy and Peter established in Asia Minor and in Jerusalem and thereabout say, the Roman centurions, they put down in the public square, they were saying that they're looking for some guys that did a robbery of the donkey farm. And, we're passing the flyers out. We want to help the Roman centurions. Jesus said, let the world worry about the things of the world. And you worry about the things of the kingdom. So when your church sort of internet portal, your platform to the bodies of Christ is now being co-opted by local law enforcement to, hey, we're on the lookout for these guys. What has that to do with us? That we are going out searching for criminals and giving tips? It's not our job. That's not what the church has been called to. But yet when I saw, and I'm sure, it's benign, I don't think anybody meant any evil intent in placing that out there, but I was thinking to myself, have we turned that corner now? At what point did we decide that police bulletins are now going to be posted on the church website, in addition to maybe helpful hints from Scripture and the latest be on the lookout for? I mean, the church is being watered down by being intermingled, oh my gosh, with the world. That's what I'm seeing. That's why I can't watch Christian television. I'd rather watch secular television because it drives me crazy to see. Stay tuned after a word from our sponsors. Hi, this is whoever, fill in the blank. It's Perry Stone, and the mystery of the Shemitah. And which supposed the world's going to come to end on Yom Kippur, which was yesterday, and it didn't. So on the net, Christians around the world being castigated again for having believed that on September 23rd the world would come to an end, the rapture would occur, just like when Harold Camping was saying the stuff in October of 2011 and in May of 2011, and then again in September of 1988 when they said the rapture is going to occur. I think these things are happening on purpose to undercut and to destroy the credibility of Bible-believing Christians who believe in the rapture. Guys that believe in the rapture are different than Christians who don't. We are a special breed, and we, more so than any other branch or sect of Christianity, are taking it on the chin. Not just from the atheists and the secular humanists, but from other so-called Christians. I was infuriated to see, it was interesting because I saw an old teaching by Chuck Missler, who used to be really solid in the 90s. On the book of Revelation. I was watching it to see if I could pick up anything to throw in, as it's sort of an insight in our study for tonight. And for some reason he was talking about the intro to Revelation, in Revelation chapter 4, and he says, the rapture is embedded in there. And he did a great job of laying out. He said, rapture is in these different verses. But, it's a common thing, and he, in his sort of mathematically precise way of speaking, he was like, scholars who refuse to show, competence in a particular area have been, known to say that the rapture was created about 100 years ago by this woman McDonald, Mary Ann McDonald, or whatever, and John Nelson Darby, and whatever. And he just pointed out, he's like, oh, no, that's wrong, because, these writings in the 300s AD and this writing, whatever. He said, did those people popularize it? Absolutely. But to say that it was created by these people in the 1850s, he said, that's just lazy scholarship. And, people who consider themselves competent scholars shouldn't engage in it. And the very next second, I go on Facebook and I'm looking on it, and, I see Good Fight Ministries, which is Joe Shamel, doing a post about Jacob Prosh, who's had some kind of leg disease and whatever, and they both were like, Yeah, and Jacob Rush is supernaturally recovering from his infection. And by the way, the rapture is a farce, and it was created 100 years ago by it is exactly the same words that Chuck Missler was castigating in his teaching tape from like 1999. And these guys are promoting that same lie today. And it made me think, are these guys who are promoting, these sort of Calvinist guys who hate the rapture, are they promoting a lie, or are they just ignorant? Are they willfully ignorant? I just can't believe a guy who's been in the ministry and is famous on TV, he's got his DVDs and teaching tapes, doesn't know that Margaret MacDonald and John Nelson Darby didn't create the rapture in 1850, but that they believed in it, maybe popularized it. But for you to come out and repeat that, Joe Schmel says, and the rapture is clearly not biblical, because, and the proof is, despite all the verses in the Bible that say the rapture is going to occur, because we all know that Margaret MacDonald, little girl from Scotland, created it in 1850. So all I'm saying is that what I'm seeing in the church, the commercialized church, the ones that are on TV, the ones that are on radio, the ones that are on Facebook, the ones that are on the internet, they all seem, every one of them, seem to be selling something. They'll give you some scripture, and then they always have a break to sell you something. David Jeremiah was talking about the book of Revelation. I was listening to him on the radio, and then he took a break from talking about the book of Revelation to tell me that I got a new book coming out. And if you want to pre-order, right now, you can save 20% off the list price, which will be X. And I'm like, when did Paul sell the gospel to the people?
Wow.
And I think that this is what Paul was warning us of in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that a time is going to come when, it crept in. We keep waiting for the satanic devil church to come on, on the air, and it's going to be Satan sitting in stripper poles and, and all that. But I don't think it's going to be, necessarily has to be that blatant. I think it's already happened. What did Jesus say? When the Son of Man returns, will he find the faith on the earth? And Dave Hunt was the first guy to ever kind of point that out to me, and I was like, what was he talking about? Like, well, he's God, he knows everything. Is he asking me because he doesn't know? Or is he asking rhetorically because he's trying to make a point to me? Is he telling me, Herb, when I come back to you at the rapture, it's going to be so bad, not in the world, but in the church, that it will be very rare that you're going to be able to find another believer who actually believes in scriptures and wait for me to come in the rapture, because the vast majority of the people that are going to be calling themselves Christians at the time I come back to the earth aren't really going to be. Roman Catholics call themselves Christians. They fight you to the death over the right to call themselves Christians. So over 1 billion of them in the world. Over 1 billion. And they have what they believe has nothing to do with the scriptures. And so the people that I'm seeing, who call themselves Protestants that are on television and radio aren't any better, because they're selling stuff and they're telling us lies. And it troubles me, guys. It troubles me that I'm seeing this stuff. And I just feel burdened to talk about it and say, a little group like this, and we got Vaughn over in Milan, Italy, who's so hungry for Christian fellowship and good, solid Bible teaching that he's willing to stay up to 2 or 3 in the morning, Italy time, to be able to fellowship with us here when he's out of town, because you can't get it anywhere else. And I'm not saying I'm the only show in town, but I'm saying little groups like this are the only repositories of real biblical truth anywhere in the world. What you're seeing I can't turn Christian radio on and listen to it because it drives me bananas. Because it's selling you something, or it's feeding me false doctrine that I was like, I never went to seminary, but I know that's a lie because I read the Bible. Why don't you guys who have these theological degrees, why don't you know? Maybe they do. They just don't care. And so
that's even worse.
One
thing is to not know, but to know and to still.
And is not that the world that we live in today? So I'm on my soapbox because I just think that the Lord wants us to be reminded that while we are small in numbers, and we are not like, on every satellite, channel on DirecTV, you won't see me 4 times in one day on, like you see Perry Stone and John Hagee and all these guys who lied about the rapture occurring on September 23rd and sold all these books on blood moons. You guys, and I remember when Albert was coming here and he kept, so what do you think about the blood moons? I was like, it's a scam. Albert, let it go. I checked into it. I met these guys at the Bible Prophecy Conference I went to when I went up to Orlando. I said, it's a scam. This guy, Jonathan Kahn, was there. The minute I walked into the room and looked at him face to face, I mean, heard him. The minute I was in the same room with him, I was like, oh, no. That guy, there's something demonic going on with that guy. I got up and walked out. Like, I'm not even going to sit through the seminar. I mean, I can't even sit through it because it was that obvious that there was something dark happening. And the people were just under a spell. And now we see that this guy predicted that yesterday was the day of the rapture. Now he'll lay low for the next 6 months, and next year he'll be out with a new book saying why, you guys misunderstood. Oh, and these guys, and John Hagee, who's on all these different Christian television networks, is saying the same thing. And they're in bed with Jim Baker, who went to prison for fraud, who was an adulterer and a homosexual. But yet he's back into this blood moon, Bible prophecy, last days, let me sell you a book. And they're all selling survival stuff. Because they don't believe Jesus is coming for us in the rapture, even though they write books about, like, on this date, the world's going to come to an end. And for people that believe in the rapture, this is the day of the rapture. But because we don't really believe in the rapture, we're also selling survival foods at a great price for now. And then you can make it through the Daniel 70th week without having to worry about Jesus being on your side. If you get my survival food and, a Berkey water purifier, you'll be able to make it on your own. You don't need Jesus. So these things are happening in the church, boys and girls, and I'm telling you guys this because you have to be the guys that pick up the right, because like this, a war's going on, and all the front line guys, the guys who were trained, they got killed during the first, excursion against enemy lines. And, like in any war, weapons fall down, where the next guys through have to pick up their weapons and continue marching forward. And so it's fallen to us to be the Christian. Dave Hunt's gone, Dave Breeze is gone, some of the other guys like Zola Levin, who were solid guys, who you could look to for spiritual food and nourishment. They've been taken home to heaven by the Lord, and their weapons lay on the field, the Bible, and it's up to us to pick up those weapons of our warfare, the Word of God, and to march off into battle. Because guys like Jonathan Kahn and John Hagee and Mark Biltz and all these fraudulent scam artists who are out there calling themselves Christians, like TBN and like Joel Osteen and Joyce Myers and all these women pastors that are on TV now, they're not really fighting the battle. They're not saving souls, so somebody's got to do it. And guess who's going to have to do it now? It's going to have to be you guys. Because all the other guys that are more qualified, they ain't doing it. Satan's already offered them a deal. They can't refuse. So they signed on the dotted line. Now they're contractually recording for Satan's label. So they can't do anything for the Lord. Now you, independent contractor, you have to pick up the weapons of our warfare, the Word of God, and march off and do these things that we're studying tonight. These are important things that you're not likely to hear on a Christian radio show. And even if you do find a decent Bible prophecy teacher, that guy's almost certainly selling you a book. I got a book coming out, and I'm not going to tell you how Revelation ends until you buy the book, and then you'll find out how it ends. So it's outrageous, but those are the days we live in. So, Ben, we've gotten to you. Revelation 11, chapters 7 through 10.
Now, when they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Then those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days, and not allow their dead bodies to be put into graves. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry, and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth.
Wow, so we see something happening here. Looks like verse 7 tells us now, when Satan got really pissed, he killed them. No, it says now, when they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit, who is that guy? That should be a
Antichrist.
quick, that should be a quick answer, boys.
Yep.
Yeah, Antichrist. With Antichrist, when they finish their testimony, God allows Antichrist to put them to death. He hadn't been able to heretofore. And, it says, the beast that comes from out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. And he won't allow their bodies to be buried. Why do you think that is?
Just to make sure there's no funny business like back in Gethsemane.
That thing with Jesus.
Yeah.
I remember how those Christians were like, this time we're going to have any doubt about having Roman guards, and the Roman guards are going to give me one story, and the Pharisees gave me another story. This time, we're going to leave them in the street. And it says, and this is interesting because
CNN will be like 24 hours on.
Well, look at it. Verse 9, it says, this is basically how you can prove. This is verse 9 of Revelation 11 is an apologetic you can use to prove that the Bible is the one true and only Word of God, not the Quran, not the Hadith, not the Bhagavad Gita, not the Ramayana, but the Bible. Why? Because verse 9 is predicting satellite television. He's saying, John is writing this in 96 AD. There's no such thing as television. We take it for granted because we're in, 2015. When you first read it in the 70s, we had TV in the 70s. So you took it for granted when it says, then people from, peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies for 3.5 days. How will all these people be able to see something that happens in, what city does it happen in?
Jerusalem.
Right, because we know that spiritually is Sodom in Egypt, but it's where the Lord was crucified. So it has to be Jerusalem. But people from all over the world, from every tongue and tribe, will be able to see it and hear it in their own language, because CNN, like we got our anchors, and CNN Europe, take it away in France, and so it's going to be all over the world because of satellite television. But John didn't know anything about satellites or television, but he put it in there anyway, because that's what he was told to write. This proves that the Bible is supernatural. 60 years ago, this wouldn't have made any sense. For my great-grandmother, when she read this, she was like, "This, what kind of supernatural miracle be this?" But it's not a supernatural miracle anymore. Because 60 years ago, they invented a television set, or thereabouts, and now everybody can see everything all at once. And so, we see, after they finish their ministry, they're going to be forced to lay in the streets for 3.5 days, and it's going to be put on television, and everybody around the world is going to watch it. But then, Steve, verses 11 through 14, something happens.
And after
This regularly scheduled programming from CNN is beginning of breaking news from CNN. Stuff's hitting the fan in Jerusalem.
Party's over.
Yeah.
And after
You're right. And Christmas, they have some kind of abortive Christmas celebration where you're giving presents to one another because the false prophets, the prophets got killed, so they started celebrating and giving gifts.
Rejoice and make merry, and shall give gifts to one another.
Right.
Gifts to one another.
Is it not like it's Christmas? It's some kind of Babylonian pagan ceremony where the guys that were criticizing their wicked, false, pseudo-Christian cult are now dead in the whole world. Just like I saw the whole world going after the Pope today and yesterday in Washington, D.C., the whole world's going to go after, the people the Antichrist that kills these two prophets of the Lord. And they're going to have Christmas come early. So, Steve, verse 11 through 14.
And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven, saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell. In the earthquake were slain men of 7,000, and the raiment were affrighted, and gave glory to God of heaven. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe comes quickly.
Okay, so in essence, God's he's going to end the party. And he's kind of letting you know, now all the stuff's going to hit the fan. He says the magic words come up here, which is the same thing. He says when John is on the island of Patmos, at the end of the 7 letters to the 7 churches, when he writes that letter down, what does he hear? He hears those same 3 words, come up here. Next thing you know, he gets raptured up into heaven. And so we see the prophets coming back to life. They received the martyr's crown, and they got to come back to life. So that's awesome. 7th trumpet sounds, and when he sounds, man, it's all going to start hitting the fan. And so, we're back around to you. And that very same seventh trumpet, which we saw the seven trumpets begin a little back in Revelation chapter 9, which again kind of fits into the seven trumpets actually being sounded during the second half of the tribulation period after the false prophets are killed or shortly before they're killed. So, Ingrid, if you would, verses 15 through 19.
And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders, which sat before God on their seats, fell upon their faces and worshipped God, saying, We give thee thanks, O Lord, our God mighty, which art and wast and art to come, because thou hast taken to thee thy great power and hast reigned. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament. And there were lightnings, and voices, and thunderings, and an earthquake, and great hail.
So here we have God basically, shifting the cameras from the celebration on earth that gets interdicted by the resurrection of the two prophets who get called up into heaven to celebration breaking out in heaven. And the celebration is breaking out in heaven because the 70th week of Daniel is almost over. So we know we must be nearing the end of the tribulation period, because it says when the seventh angel sounded, there were loud voices in heaven saying, The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So they apparently feel like, hey, the time is just about up. And it says, God will destroy them that destroy the earth. So all this Project Greenpeace, eco-friendly nonsense, where you see the Pope talking about global warming. I'm so glad, President Obama, that you are talking to the people about global warming. Don't worry about global warming. Don't worry about preserving the earth. God will take care of the people that destroy the earth. When the nuclear bombs start going off, huge chunks of real estate on the planet Earth are going to be destroyed. You don't have to worry about gas emissions and global warming, because we're going to have thermonuclear radiological waste going through the skies and killing off large portions of plant life on the earth. And during the millennium, Jesus is going to have to supernaturally bring that back. So why worry about fixing the earth? Jesus is going to take care of the earth, and it's all going to be burned up anyway at the end of the millennium, and we're going to get a brand new one. So there you have it. So the scene shifts from the CNN cameras in Jerusalem on the earth to the CNN cameras, or the God cameras up in heaven, showing a celebration because Jesus is about to be sent down to the earth to take over. And so now we kind of shift over to Revelation chapter 12, and we'll be able to move through that, hopefully relatively.
Quick question.
Oh, yeah.
I think you mentioned this, but just to double check, you're saying that the two witnesses are second in the Great Tribulation or in the first 3.5 years?
I think that they are, they buy the farm in the second half of the tribulation period. Because, if you matched out 1260 to 1260 and you'd have to have them killed at the first day of the 70th week, and then 1260 days later, you're at the midway point. If you have them killed probably sometime during the end of the first week or the first half of the 70th week, then you have 1260 days, then you get another 3.5 days where they're watching, and then we have a celebration in heaven because Jesus is about to come back. So we know that it probably should be sometime
just before
at the tail end of the first half of the 70th week, right? Because they're 1260 day ministry plus 3.5 days laying in the streets, and then they call it in heaven, and then in heaven we see the next thing happen in heaven is like, hey, the kingdom of the Lord becomes that of his Christ and whatever. So
How do we know that 3.5 days laying in the street is not 3.5 years, saying they're going to be there the whole time of the Great Tribulation? To say
well
until the end, right?
because it wouldn't make sense to use sort of a mixed metaphor though, right? If you said that their ministry will be for 1,260 days, and then they get killed and they're laying in the streets for another 3.5 days, then it would have to also be 1,260 years of ministry, and then another 3.5 years of ministries.
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
It just doesn't make any sense for God to use a mixed
Days,
metaphor
yeah. It
in
wouldn't
reference to the same
sentence,
person.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
And Jesus was
Yeah.
3 days also, so there's some similarities there.
Well,
that they're left to be visible for the 3 days because Jesus then was doing his thing.
and plus, you also see that clearly this is not metaphorical or allegorical language. These are real people that are doing real stuff, and they're going to have a ministry. And it's going to be for X amount of days, an exact number of days. And then they are going to get, right, 3.5 years, and then they're going to get killed.
Yeah.
And their body's going to be dead. But it wouldn't make would make no sense for the Lord to mix the metaphor. For 3.5 years, they're going to be dead.
It makes sense they're in mostly, if not entirely, in the Great Tribulation because they're also turning waters to blood, striking the earth with plagues as often as they desire. And that sounds more like the Great Tribulation and the happy times when there's a peace accord and everything, and the Antichrist is consolidating his power.
Yeah, and that's
during the
Christmas. People are like, hey, Christmas presents. Plus CNN camera are not going to be sitting on public square in Jerusalem for 3.5 years while the bodies bloat and decay and then turn to rot and turn to bones and whiten in the sun. 3.5 years later, the bones would be all that's left. So no, it's a little 3.5 days, and then we take it from there. So all right, so now we're at Revelation chapter 12, and so let's go ahead and are we at you, Phil? Okay, read for us verse 1.
And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars.
Okay, who's the woman?
Israel.
Okay, man, because the Catholic Church says that woman is none other than Mary.
12 tribes.
Replacement theology Christians claim that woman is none other than the church.
Wrong.
But it can't be, right? It can't be. Right. The church is gone. Ben is right.
Mm-hmm.
Because, one, she's, we find out later, she is with child.
Mm-hmm.
So we have here a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. And the 12 stars are representative of what?
12 tribes of Israel.
12 tribes of Israel. Usually stars are what?
Angels.
But in this specific case, one of the rare instances where the term star is used symbolically to make reference to the 12 tribes of Israel, which would make it a perfect metaphor for this woman clothed in the sun to be the nation Israel. So we go to verse 2. Ben, read that for us.
Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth.
Okay, so that's the reason why we know it's not the church. Dave Hunt pointed this out to me. He said, if the woman is the church, then we're in trouble because she's with child, and we're supposed to be a chaste virgin. Right? A chaste virgin is the way the church is described in Scripture, but she's pregnant, and she gives birth to a child. So it has to be the nation Israel. And she gives birth to a man-child. Who is this man-child?
Jesus.
Christ.
Yeah, the Messiah, Jesus, as it turns out. All right, so we run on to verse 3. Steve, read that for us.
And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads.
All right, who is this great red dragon that has
Satan.
crowns? Okay,
Yep.
the dragon is none other than Satan, and we're going to get a little more into detail as to what the crowns represent when we get a little bit later on, I think in Revelation chapter 13, I think it is. We're going to be talking about it next week, and regarding, the different kingdoms of the world, and why he has 7 horns and then 10 horns or whatever, but suffice it to say that the fiery red dragon is none other than Satan. And we kind of have that sort of depicted here in our 7 key figures section. Got the woman, and we'll review that in a second. But let's move on, and Ingrid, we'll back around to you. Verse 4.
And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them down to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born.
All right, so what's that verse telling us? Now we're getting into a section of the book of Revelation that's talking, using sort of metaphorical language to describe things like Israel isn't really a woman with a crown on her head who's pregnant. Israel is a nation. So this is one of those instances where you can say, okay, the Bible is using symbology here, or metaphorical language. Whereas when it talks about the Antichrist in 1260 days, that's not symbolical language, that's literal language. But what does this verse 4 mean?
Is Herod trying to kill Jesus? Paralleling that?
Once again.
Exactly. Herod tries to kill Jesus, and who's the dragon in his tail dragging down a third of the stars? What does that mean?
Lucifer and his followers.
Who were his followers?
Cast out the angels.
The fallen angels?
The angels. That's exactly right. That's right. Because Lucifer has followers right here on the earth, probably right here in this building, but they're not stars because they're not angels. That reference to the tail dragging is talking about the original rebellion in heaven, where he convinced 33 and a third, which is why that's such a big number in Freemasonry, 33 and a third of the holy angels to buy into his plan and to rebel against God. And so, we see that happen. Now we get to verse 5, Ben.
And she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne.
And who is this we're talking about?
Messiah.
Right? And when was Jesus caught up to the throne of God?
Resurrection.
The resurrection?
No,
Is he
sorry,
called?
the ascension.
Ascension?
Ascension, that's right. So quickly, Isaiah chapter 9. Ben, since that's yours, you might as well go ahead and do it. But Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. Steve. Yeah, that male child symbolism has been used before. In the Old Testament, the prophet Isaiah made reference to a leader.
Isaiah 9.
Verses 6 and 7.
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end,
So
upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice, from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this.
while I'm explaining that, Ben, flip over to Zechariah, which is the second to last book of the New Testament, of the Old Testament. Isaiah, uses that symbolic language of a little child shall lead them. And they use this verse for Zechariah.
Yep.
Okay.
But
To make reference to Christmas, but right? You see that on Christmas cards, but that's not really what it's making reference to. He comes the second time as a mighty king, but he came originally as a child. But he ultimately will sit upon the throne of David. And so in Revelation 12, we're seeing the male child born who Herod tried to kill, but then fled into Egypt, right? It says, that basically the child was protected when you were reading there, verse 5. And the male child was born who would rule all nations with a rod of iron, and the child was caught up to heaven and to God and to a throne. Eventually he was caught up, but initially he went into Egypt. But while we're at Zechariah, read Zechariah chapter 14, verses 1 through 4 for me, Ben.
Zechariah 14, what verses?
1 through 4, the last chapter of Zechariah.
Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations, as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move towards the north, and half of it towards the south.
So we find out that Jesus is going to come back and actually fight on behalf of the nation Israel. As makes reference to David as he fought in the day of battle. Jesus is going to come back and do the same thing on behalf of Israel, the way David used to fight for Israel. Drop down to verse 9, Ben.
Sorry. Yep. Just looking back. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day it shall be, the Lord is one, and his name one.
So that day he'll be the king of the whole earth. And we see that being prophesied, really laid out in Revelation chapter 12. The woman gives birth to this child who inherits all of these promises and will sit on the throne of David, who is the great king of Israel. So Steve, pop back into Revelation chapter 12 and read for us verse 6.
And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days.
Interesting. So now what is that making reference to?
Maybe the tribulation saints.
The Great Tribulation period, Ingrid, 1,260 days. But it's talking about the woman and what's going to happen?
She's going to flee in the wilderness.
Into the wilderness. It says the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there for 1,260 days. Basically, what we're seeing here is anti-Semitism will grow to an all-time high at this point. Satan will try to eradicate all Jews on earth so that Jesus won't have anyone to come back to fulfill the prophecies. So if you don't take the mark of the beast and you continue to become a follower of Jesus, especially if you're Jewish, you're going to get special persecution, and Satan would do another Holocaust, only this time he would eliminate all Jews so that the prophecies would be frustrated. But God is going to supernaturally set up a place of refuge in the wilderness, and some people believe that to be Petra, a stone city built into the mountains on the other side of the Jordan River in the nation Jordan. And that when Jesus says in Matthew 24, don't go back to your house, but flee when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, flee to Petra right now. And so some people believe that is where God's going to supernaturally protect them for a period of 1,260 days, which is the exact period of time of the second half of the tribulation period, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, 42 months. And so, since...
or can you clarify?
Yeah.
Are
Steve,
these
flip to Daniel chapter 7 while we're doing that. Go ahead.
Are these the 144,000?
No, 144,000 ultimately are killed. But these
so those
are
the
people...
tribulation saints, the ones who are killed.
Well, no. Tribulation saints are anybody that believes on Jesus after the rapture, who doesn't take the mark. Most of them will be Gentiles, but there's also going to be a large remnant of Jews that will refuse to take the mark. But God is going to supernaturally keep them alive. The 144,000 preached to these guys, got them converted. Then, when the 144,000 completed their ministry, they all got martyred, right? Because we wound up seeing them on the throne. And they said, hey, how long, O Lord, until, you avenge our blood upon those upon earth? Be patient, wrestle a little while longer until the full number of your brethren be completed. So, there's a remnant, it says, and so all Israel will be saved. God's going to supernaturally keep the Jews that are converted by the 144,000 from being, killed off by Antichrist, because he has to be able, according to Zechariah, to come back to rescue Israel. If they're all dead, then Zechariah can't come true. So he's going to supernaturally keep them alive. For Gentile Christians, they're mostly going to get martyred. So tribulation saints are going to get martyred, and then some tribulation saints are going to make it through to the end and aren't killed yet when Jesus comes back at the second coming. Those will be the saints that will enter into the millennium as human beings, Jew or Gentile, get married, have children, and raise up little people. And then during the 1,000 years that Jesus is on the throne, new generations of people will be born, and we'll probably be back up to 10, 20 billion people, because there'll be no disease on earth. So there'll be lots and lots of people that we, the church that's now the bride of Christ, will have to minister to during the 1,000 year period of time will be preaching the gospel to these newborn human beings that are not saved and who are also not supernatural. So they're going to live on a perfected earth, so they're going to probably live close to 1,000 years. But they're going to need to hear the gospel, and they're going to have to make a decision one way or another. And so those will be the children of the tribulation saints. The tribulation saints that were martyred, that go to heaven, won't be getting married. They'll be like us. They won't be getting married and doing any of that stuff during the 1,000 years. But remnant Israel that's saved will go into the millennium, and the population of Israel will grow again. And the Gentile believers who didn't get killed will go into the millennium and have children, and they'll repopulate the earth, basically. And the church, the bride of Christ, will be the priests and ministers preaching the gospel and interceding, with the Lord and all that. We're priests and kings before our God. And so he's going to use us in ministerial positions when, the tribulation is over and the millennium begins. So, Steve, follow that with Daniel 7:25.
And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, times, and dividing of time.
I think this is making reference to the same period of time that Revelation 12 verse 6 says the woman hid for 1,260 days, which is the second half of the tribulation period, or the Great Tribulation period. Daniel chapter 12 verse 7, Steve.
And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, and all these things shall be finished.
Okay, so again, we see the same time period, time dividing time, being called 3.5 years here. So just for review, jump, if you will, Steve, over to Daniel chapter 9 and read verse 24, which will lay out for us, our foundational period of time.
70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy.
Okay, so what Steve just said is 70 weeks. The entire 70 weeks are determined to bring in what, Steve?
Bring in the holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy.
So what does that mean? He's saying at the end of 70 weeks, what's going to happen?
Jesus will establish his kingdom.
Okay, kingdom of heaven is established on the earth at the end of 70 weeks. Okay, now, if you would, flip down a bit and read for us Daniel chapter 9, verse 27.
And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate.
Okay, so just by way of review, Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 gives us the entire 70 weeks of Daniel, a 490-year period of time, separated by a 2,000-year period called the church age. After the first 483 years, the church era separates the first 69 weeks from the final 70th week. After the church era ends at the rapture, then the last of those 70 weeks, or the 70th week, occurs. But in the midst of the week, what happens, Steve, in the midst of the week?
That's when when there's let's see.
The abomination of desolation.
Antichrist sits on the throne.
Exactly. Antichrist will come into the rebuilt temple, and that's why on our diagram here we've got 666 on the temple, because it's the Antichrist temple. The rebuilt temple will be rebuilt because the Antichrist is going to allow it to be rebuilt. But the abomination of desolation that Jesus warned about in Matthew 24 is Antichrist going into the temple so that he, as God, enters into the temple of God, declaring himself to be God himself. And so we see that happening in the middle of the week. And so then that means we now have only 3.5 years left, or 1,260 days, or 42 months. So again, the Bible has got pinpoint precision here, telling us the stuff that's really going to happen. So Ingrid, back around to you, Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 10.
And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the dragon, and the great dragon, was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him.
Okay, so again, this portion of our diagram called the 7 key figures, we basically talk about everyone that we've already looked at. We've looked at first person is the woman, who we agreed was Israel. The dragon is
Satan.
Okay, and that's basically the third blow. The male child is
Jesus.
And then we've got Michael the archangel that we just heard about. He does what? What did you just tell us there, Ingrid?
Fought against the dragon.
He fights against the dragon. And that's right. And that's depicted right here. Dragon is cast out of heaven, and now, Michael, God tells Michael, kick him out, and he's not allowed to come back. He's been allowed for 6,000 years to go back to heaven to act as the devil, or the slanderer, the accuser, the prosecutor. Did you see what Ben did? Surely you're not going to forgive that. And then Jesus has to come in and act as our advocate before the Father, while Satan stands there and acts as the prosecuting attorney, the slanderer, which is what the word devil really means. So he's our adversary, Satan, or our slanderer, the devil.
I have a question about that timing, because that's speaking the kind of general outside of space and time continuum, because the judgment day doesn't actually occur.
Say that again. Start from the beginning again.
My question is Satan is not actually speaking poorly of people during their judgment, nor is Christ interceding with them during their judgment, because that judgment day hasn't occurred yet.
Exactly.
So it's more that he first of all, heaven is out and God is outside of space-time continuum, and so in general, Satan is just always there and prepared.
He's not always there, because if he's always there,
until
then
that
he's
point,
God. But
until that point, and he's pointing out, oh, look at that, what that guy did. But it's not during the judgment.
right.
It's rather just, saying all the bad things against us that can be said against us.
Right. When the fall occurs here, Satan gets cast down from the third heaven, which was his home, to now occupy the air. The kingdom of the air is where he dwells. The first heaven, where the sun, the clouds and birds are, and outer space, where the sun, moon, and stars are. That's where he lives. But he's allowed access to the throne room of God throughout the entire 6,000-year history of the human race. So he can't be everywhere at once, or at the same place, 2 different places at the same time, because it's not God. He's limited. But he can be here and see, oh, okay, Adam and Eve did, and then he can go, boom. He has a visa that allows him, to get in through the gates of heaven and get into the throne room where he used to live and work. And he's got limited, passport or visa that will expire on a certain day and time. And his visa that allows him access to the throne of God, so he can accuse us, expires at the midway point of the tribulation. At that point, your visa's expired, you're out. So Michael takes him, tosses him out of heaven, and he's really upset now, because he now knows that his time is short. What does that mean? He knows that he has how long?
1,260 days.
1,260 days. So we see here in our chart, war in heaven. Now, it's confusing, because is this the war that 1/3 of the angels? I think that occurred back here, shortly after the creation. And the angels and Satan are cast down into the kingdom of the air, the first and second heaven, as opposed to the third heaven. But then, during the midway point of the tribulation, the archangel Michael tosses Satan out again, and he's no longer given access, and that's what making reference to war in heaven. Now Antichrist is revealed on the earth. And now Satan can't go back up into the third heaven anymore. And now he's upset because he knows he only has 1,260 days left to do his evil work. So he uses the Antichrist and the false prophet to accomplish his goals. So now, I think, Phil, we're around to you. Revelation 12, verse 11.
And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death.
That's a beautiful verse. It says, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives even unto death. So who did they overcome? Well, they overcame the guy that was being talked about in verse 10, the accuser, who was Satan. They overcame Satan by the blood of the Lamb. Not through their own efforts, but by Jesus' death on the cross and by the word of their testimony. They overcame Satan by preaching the gospel, by telling about salvation, the word of their testimony. But then it adds, and they loved not their lives unto death. What does that mean? That's sort of a poetic King Jamesian way of saying they were killed. Their word of their testimony overcame Satan. Now, in the process, they got killed because they loved not their lives. I love Jesus. I don't care about my life. Even to the point where Satan's like, I've had it with you, I'm going to kill you. And they're killed. So they love not their lives unto death. And they become those martyr saints whose souls immediately go to heaven and are gathered around beneath the throne. And they're like, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood on those upon the earth? And these are the last of the martyr tribulation saints before Jesus comes back to save the remnant Israel that has not yet been martyred. Because God is not going to allow that to happen. So, Ben, verse 12.
Therefore rejoice, O heaven, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time.
He's been kicked out of heaven. He no longer has access to act as the prosecuting, attorney. It's just like I have an access card for the courthouse, and I can show my card, my bar card, and I can get into the court. At some point, his card's going to be revoked. Like, now that doesn't work here anymore. I'm sorry, your ID card is expired.
Blacklisted.
Yeah, so now he's mad. He's on the no-fly zone. Like, I can't get it. Nope. Now he goes back to earth, and he's infuriated because he knows I only got 1,260 days until I'm going to get 1,000 years in the bottomless pit of Tartarus. And so he's upset about that. So Steve, verses 13, 14.
And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, and into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time from the face of the serpent.
And there again, we have what period of time?
1,260 days.
3.5 years. We see it. So we see that depicted here on our 7 key figures chart. The Archangel Michael casts out the red dragon, and when he's cast out, he gets mad, and dragon is cast out of heaven, goes back to the earth to persecute the woman, and we agree that the woman is none other than
Israel.
right. So we're talking super anti-Semitism, like Adolf Hitler on crack and steroids combined. It's going to be kill all Jews on sight. God's going to have to supernaturally keep them alive, lest they all be killed by the Antichrist, who is being manipulated by Satan himself, who is now kicked out of heaven and has nowhere to go. So we see that sort of wanderlust on the earth manifesting itself in a form of incredible, invidious, super anti-Semitism. And that's another way of knowing when you hear these pseudo-Christians that are constantly kind of hammering, we talked about that Judaism or Jews in general and has this bent against Jews. Even though they claim to be Christians, you know that they may have been deceived, they may be a false convert, or they may be a Christian who is deeply, deeply in deception, because Satan's certainly going to use anti-Semitism in the last days. Ben.
Just back to 11 quickly. So
Yep.
Archangel Michael dies in that battle in heaven?
Well, angels can't die.
Then I'm sorry, I was confused, because you said that, and they did not love their lives to the death. Because when they say that they overcame him, I think that they refers to Archangel Michael and his angels fought against.
Why do you say that?
Well, who is the they referring to in that battle in heaven?
Right, in 11 we talked about that, right? He'll answer that.
Tribulation
Those are the overcomers are the tribulation saints who overcame Satan with what? The word of the testimony. Angels don't have a word of testimony because Jesus didn't die for them.
Okay.
So when you look out, war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So Satan and his entourage are kicked out of heaven, but they can't be killed because they're angels, so they can't die. Okay, so they get kicked out of heaven because there was no place found for them in heaven anymore. Then verse 9, great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old. Just in case you had any question of who this is, this nails it all for you. Verse 9 lays it all together. So the dragon was cast out. Who's the dragon? He's the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And then it goes on to say, then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation, strength, and all of that. And let's see, who read that? Did you read that, English?
Which one?
10.
10. Yeah. 10 was read by... Well, we read it, but... So 10, let's read it again. Then I heard a loud voice saying, now salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren who accused them before God day and night has been cast down. So if they're saying our brethren, these are redeemed people in heaven singing the accuser of our brethren who stood before the throne. Like the church is up in heaven as the bride, and we have to watch Satan coming and going, accusing the other sons of Adam, daughters of Eve, our brethren who we're related to biogenetically through Adam. We have to watch them being accused day and night by Satan. But now Satan is cast down. And so we're celebrating up in heaven. Yay! Satan can't accuse him anymore. And then it says, verse 11, and they overcame him by the blood. Who? The accused. The people that have been accused by Satan all these years overcome him by what? Guns and knives? No. They overcome him by the blood of the Lamb because they believed on Jesus. Angels can't believe in Jesus. They can't be saved by the blood of the Lamb. And by the word of their testimony. Angels don't have any testimony because Jesus didn't die for them. We have testimony because Jesus died for our sins. And they loved not their lives even unto death. So they died. They were martyred. But angels can't be killed. So
So they overcame him in the sense that they successfully struggled against. It's not that they overcame.
Yeah, they subdued. Right, they didn't stop. No. Yeah, they overcame his intrigues. Right.
Satan for good.
Yeah.
Right. His job is to destroy us.
Yeah.
And so they overcame his efforts against them by preaching the word and allowing themselves to be martyred. And now they have a martyr's crown and riches in heaven. They still got killed, and Satan didn't get stopped, but he wasn't able to accomplish his goal in their lives, which was to ruin their testimony and destroy their lives.
Thank you for clarifying that.
No,
sorry to go back.
No, that's good because that helps clarify it for people that are listening in, and I know the stuff, so I can gloss over stuff. But it's always great to ask questions because then it makes it perfectly clear.
Yeah, and I think we did. I think I did miss 10.
Yeah,
and then I didn't understand when you were saying that accuser part. I'm like, what is he speaking about? Because
you must have skipped over
it. Yeah, now that's so definitely clarified how Satan is accusing the brethren.
What part did you read?
I stopped at 9. No?
9 and 10 read.
I did. I read that. Okay. Okay.
Yes, no.
I think I stopped at 9.
I think you might have, because I don't remember. I don't think you did.
But thanks for the clarification, because I think quickly reading 12, it can be confusing who they is and who's.
In fact, you definitely didn't, because the now salvation, strength, kingdom of our God, and the power of Christ have come for the accuser of our brethren. That's a powerful verse, but Ben, thank you for bringing that up. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So anyway, we're gonna wind it up, and we're gonna finish it off, and we're gonna end it. We went almost exactly 2 hours. That's good. We finished right on time, despite my segue and my aside on Vatican's invasion of our dear and beloved country. That once upon a time America was a Christian country, but it is no longer, as our president has reminded us. But anyway, back to the conclusion of Revelation chapter 12, verses 15 through 17, Ingrid.
And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so now we're using symbolical language again here. So again, the dragon, who's also the serpent, is referring to who?
Devil.
Okay, and now this is a little more tricky. Water spewed out of the dragon's mouth to drown the woman. What is that?
Anti-Semitism?
That's exactly what it is. It's a super anti-Semitism coming directly from Satan. That's why I try to warn our brothers, like, don't know what you're doing it, but you're basically spewing out all of Satan's bile unawares to get them for being the chosen people. You're falling into his plot. But then it says the earth opened her mouth to swallow the flood. What might that be making reference to?
It's like a supernatural protection or something.
Well, it is, and I think it's specifically what Steve had talked about. The stone city of Petra
Yeah.
Okay.
is basically a city carved into the side of a mountain. It's actually in a mountain range in the Jordan Valley range across the Jordan River, a narrow path between two mountains, like a little gorge that you have to walk in single file. You couldn't drive tanks in there, you couldn't drive jeeps in there, you couldn't drive military carriers through there because it's too narrow. But when you get through the narrow passageway, you have like a city that was carved into the face of like a granite mountain like thousands of years ago. And many people believe that's where God is going to supernaturally use. Basically, the earth itself opens up into a city. A narrow gorge opens up into this city built into a mountain. And so it's possible that that's what God is talking about, the Bible's talking about when it says the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed the anti-Semitism, and they were protected for a period of time. Now, the offspring of the woman is none other than who?
The Jews.
Has to be the Jews, right? If the woman is Israel, then the offspring has to be the Jews. It's not the church. You know, that's what Mark read. I said, Mark, read this. The offspring of the woman has to be the Jews, not the church. And that God is going to supernaturally protect these Jews from anti-Semitic intrigues, which we see growing stronger and stronger by the day, and has even infected, you know, the American church. You know, it's popular to do and say things that are anti-Semitic, you know, and all of that. So we have to be on our guard. So,
No, but these are Jews in the tribulation period and who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
so they're born again.
Mm-hmm.
These are guys that are born again, because the guys that aren't are going to take the mark of the beast. And so we know, yeah, there are a lot of Jews that are in Hollywood that don't believe in Jesus, don't believe in God, who are involved in the occult, involved in witchcraft, and pay lip service to, you know, the belief in a God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That does not justify us, therefore, in persecuting them, because you're falling into the satanic trap of using anti-Semitism to avenge Satan against the offspring of the woman that he's mad with, because the woman gives birth to the man-child. And right, the dragon tries to do what? The dragon wants to get the man-child, but he couldn't. Remember, when she was giving birth, he stepped there and waited, and he was going to devour him. But then he was spirited away and protected by God. So he couldn't kill the man-child, so what did he decide to do as a fallback alternative?
Kill all the firstborn.
Well, that's what Herod did. I'm saying
kill all the nation.
Well, you're right. It says when he couldn't kill the man-child, he went off to make war against her offspring. So not specifically what Herod did. Herod tried to kill Jesus in the form of Satan, or Satan in the form of Herod. But once that didn't happen, he created anti-Semitism. That's why we have the Holocaust. That's why we had, you know, the captivity, the diaspora, and all of these different things that have occurred. These horrible, terrible things that have happened to the Jews isn't just because they're, you know, rebellious people or whatever. there's a satanic plot behind the persecution of Jews throughout the history of the human race, because they are the vehicle through which the Messiah came. And so Satan has a special angst for them.
That's why Iran wants to nuke them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, with that, Ben, close us up in prayer, and then if the rapture doesn't occur before next week, we'll be in Revelation chapter 13, talking about the beast, and we'll get to the 144,000.
Thank you, Lord. We are so blessed to be here, Bible Christians, who can hear your word directly, without distortions, the plain and simple truth, as so well explained by Brother Herb. And we are particularly grateful of this these days that are so turbulent, with big government, big business, big religion, all working together towards some form of one world, new world order. So our ability to meet here together every Thursday evening, people physically here and people also watching on the internet, we are so blessed to be able to do this. As these kind of meetings and these kind of learnings and truths will become only progressively more difficult to find as the world continues to darken. So thank you for every opportunity you give us, not only to receive your word, but to share it as we are practicing for our roles as ministers in the millennium, and we need as much of your word and your protection and strength as possible. Thank you in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
That's that. Good prayer.